For 12 years, I never missed a single Sunday dinner, not through 70-hour weeks, the flu, or the blizzard of 19. Tonight I brought lasagna, Dad's favorite. Before I could even knock, I heard them. My parents, my brother, planning to take $300,000 from me just like they had before. But this time I wasn't going to smile and say, "It's fine. Stay with me," because what I did next erased everything they thought they knew about me. By 5:30, the sky had the soft bruised color of a plum, and the highway shoulder was freckled with last week's leaves. I could have driven that route with my eyes closed. Merge at exit 12. The billboard for discount mattresses, the dip in the road that made the lasagna pan slide a half-inch on the passenger seat. The car smelled like garlic and basil, and the faint, clean bite of dish soap from the towel I'd laid under the glass. Home always smelled like this in my head. Maybe that's why I kept making it. 12 years without missing a Sunday dinner. Not when I worked 70-hour weeks. Not in tax season when my calendar was just blocks of gray. Not even that winter when the flu wrung me out like a sponge, and I measured my day in teaspoons of tea. I showed up. That was my secret talent. Birthdays remembered, desserts made from scratch, calls returned, a reliable orbit no one had to think about. If you'd asked, I would have said I chose it, that it was love. The truth is, I never stopped to ask. The lasagna was the way Dad liked it, extra cheese, no ricotta layers, deliberate and clean like spreadsheets. I'd done the edges the way my grandmother taught me, sauce pulled all the way to the corners, so nothing crisped into regret. I caught a yellow light and eased through palm steady at 10 and 2, the warmth at my right thigh, a small sun reminding me I belonged somewhere. At the turnoff to my parents' neighborhood, the houses grew modest and familiar. A family of roofs stooped in the same direction. The porch lights were little lanterns against the autumn dusk. Theirs was a pale, buttery yellow. It always looked like a promise from the street, a quiet way of saying someone was waiting. I parked at the curb as usual, careful not to nose into Greg's spot in the driveway. He'd complained once loudly and never had to do it again. The engine ticked as it cooled. I balanced the pan with both hands, the heat seeping through the towel, and started up the walk. The front steps were old enough to have a rhythm. Left foot, right foot pause on the third, because it creaked like an old man telling a secret. My body remembered even when my mind was on other things. The other things were ordinary. Work tomorrow, 2 files to close a report due by noon. Laundry I hadn't folded yet. Whether I'd remember to water the fern on my fire escape. I wasn't thinking about anything dramatic. Nothing in the air warned me. If life hangs red flags, sometimes they're the same color as the sunset. I shifted the pan to my left palm to free my right for the screen door. The metal frame was cool against my knuckles. Through the mesh, I could see the hallway table with the chipped blue bowl we'd used for keys since I was a kid. The mirror above it still slanted a degree to the left, making you look a little uncertain as you stepped inside. The house was exactly as it had always been, a well-worn script waiting for my line. My mother called me dependable, the way some people say tall or brunette. Linda said it like a compliment and a reminder. "You're our Diane," she'd croon on those voicemail messages, the ones that started with small talk and ended with a favor. "You always handle things." It had never sounded heavy until it did. From the porch I could make out the kitchen's bright spill of light, the clatter of something set on tile. A murmur of voices floated down the hallway, casual and close. I smiled without meaning to Sunday. Meant chatter meant Dad's exaggerated groan. When he lifted the casserole meant Greg, picking at the crispy corner before we'd even sliced. My hand closed on the handle. Then someone said my name. "Diane won't be a problem." It was my father's voice, flat, certain. I didn't move. The weight of the pan stayed anchored in my hands, but something inside me leaned back from that sentence. Like from a sudden drop. Mom answered too fast, too soft. "But 300,000, that's insane, Greg. How did you even—" It doesn't matter how Greg cut in. His voice had that edge I knew too well, the one he used when he was late, and it was somehow your fault. What matters is that I need it handled before the audit goes deeper. You said you'd help. A chair leg dragged across tile. My father again, calm like a decision already made. We will. Diane's got that promotion, remember, senior at that big firm. She's probably making, what, 150 now. A swallow clicked in my throat. The towels weave pressed patterns into my skin. The lasagna's heat was slipping away in invisible threads. She mentioned something about bonuses, Greg said. Probably more than 150. Mom sighed. She works so hard. Always has. There was a pause long enough to taste. Then Linda's voice again, softer, as if she was laying down a path she meant to walk later. We'll say it's for the roof. The house has been leaking. We can start there, 30,000 maybe. Then later, medical bills. I'll say I need some procedures. Spread it out, Greg said, practical. She'll give it. She always gives. Remember the business loan, 20 grand. No questions. Never asked for it back. She gave us her signing bonus my father offered like a resume bullet. 40,000. Just handed it over. Greg laughed. Who does that? She still thinks we're a real family. It's almost sad. He didn't even try to take it back. Don't talk about your sister that way. Mom snapped brittle, a match flaring and dying in the same breath. She's naive, Mom. She thinks showing up with a damn lasagna means something. The word lasagna hit me square in the chest, stupid and precise. I had the urge to step forward to announce myself, to force them to rearrange their faces around the fact that I heard them. Instead, I stood there with my private tradition cooling in my palms and let their words find their marks. We'll space out the requests, Dad said, efficient in a way he never was with tools or taxes. Diane can't say no when you cry. That always works. I don't like lying to her. Mom murmured, and for a wild second I wanted to comfort her. The reflex was so old it moved before thinking. It's not lying, Greg said. It's family. Her money is family money. She doesn't have kids, doesn't have a husband. What's she spending it on anyway? That apartment, I answered silently. The one with the lock that clicks. The one where everything I paid for stayed. The only place that felt like mine. She'll be fine, Dad said, final as a gavel. She always handles things. That's what she does. Are you sure there's no other way? Mom asked, and I heard something like hope trying not to die. Greg's voice dropped. Unless you want me in federal prison for tax evasion and fraud. No, this is it. My lawyer says if I can pay it back before they dig deeper, they'll drop it to civil. Tax evasion. Fraud. The syllables were too hard for the kitchen I grew up in. They landed and lay there like tools no one knew how to pick up. I found myself staring at the hairline crack in the porch concrete I used to jam pebbles into when I was 8. I remembered the summer we painted the railings white and how the paint dried chalky on my cuticles for a week. I remembered 1,000 tiny kinds of care this house had asked of me and how easily I'd said yes, every time. It is a strange thing to watch a story you've lived in pull itself inside out. My hand was still an inch from the handle. In the glass, I could see a blur of my face, the porch light painting a pale coin on my cheek. I felt for the third step with the ball of my foot and eased back, careful not to make it complain. No sound, no trace. The door, the towel, the pan, my breath. Everything had to be quiet. Down the walkway, the lasagna, heavy and cooling the air, had the bug buzz hum of late summer. My phone vibrated in the cup holder as soon as I slid into the driver's seat. Linda's name bloomed on the screen. Where are you, sweetie? Dinner's ready. I stared at the text until the letters went soft. Then I typed with thumbs that felt like someone else's hands. Sorry. Got called into work. Emergency audit. Rain check. 3 dots. Then, oh no, we have something important to discuss. Can it wait? She was going to say at the roof, the story they'd rehearsed while I was on the porch holding my offering like a password to a door already locked. Sorry, Mom. Boss says it's urgent. Love you. I set the phone face down. I didn't start the car right away. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your heartbeat sound like shoes clicking down a hallway. A neighbor's TV bled laughter through a thin window. Somewhere a dog barked once and decided it wasn't worth it. When I finally turned the key, the engine coughed to life, and I drove without choosing a direction. gas stations, laundromats, the fluorescent geometry of late-night places where no one knows your name. The lasagna cooled beside me, becoming what it had always been: flour and water, tomatoes, and heat, effort and care. It is embarrassing, the things we mistake for love, because we can hold them. By the time I pulled into my garage, my hands had stopped shaking. I left the pan on the passenger seat and rode the elevator up with empty palms. I didn't turn on the lights. The city glow braided itself through my blinds, soft and blue. I stood by the window and pressed my forehead to the cool glass. I used to think you could build a home by showing up, by remembering the steps, by bringing the right dish, by being grateful to be included. I used to think dependable was a compliment. Maybe it is. Maybe it's just another word for easy. In the dark, my phone pulsed once more on the counter, a small square of light insisting on being seen. I let it go to sleep. Somewhere below, a siren stitched a sharp line through the night and unspooled again. I breathed. In, out. A metronome for a decision I hadn't yet admitted to. My grandmother used to say the trick to lasagna was knowing when to take it out too soon, and it collapses too late, and it turns to brick. Standing there watching my reflection hover in the black window, I understood there was a timer somewhere I had ignored for years, and I heard as clearly as the click of my apartment lock a bell I hadn't been listening for finally ring. The next part would start in the morning. But for now, my right hand still remembered the cool bite of the screen door handle, my left the weight of a dish that meant something until it didn't. And somewhere on the other side of a porch, I'd stepped away from voices were finishing a plan that thought I would never say no. The first thing I noticed was how ordinary their voices sounded while they carved me up. Not hushed, not conspiratorial, just the everyday cadence of a family deciding who brings ice and who brings dessert. Only this time the list was $300,000 long, and I was the store. Greg paced when he talked. I could hear it in the way his words moved closer to the sink, then away, then back again. He always wore his sneakers inside heel a little crushed, down a soft slap-on tile like a metronome for bad ideas. "We can't trickle this," he said. "It has to look like a sequence of emergencies, roof medical. Maybe the car finally died." "The car could be good." "The car is fine," Mom said, quick, defensive. Her voice had that quiver that used to pull me out of bed at midnight to drive across town and change a tire she could have changed herself. "Don't make me lie to her face about the car." "You won't be lying," Greg said, talking to her the way he talks to customer service when he's already decided the answer is yes. "You'll be reframing. It's family." Dad cleared his throat, the sound of a man who hated making phone calls and loved having made them. "Start with the roof. 30 now, then 30 more when the contractor finds something." He paused, and I watched the porch light ripple in the tiny scratches on the screen. "She'll suggest putting it on her card to get points. Say no. Checks are cleaner. Checks are cleaner." The phrase landed with a dull thud. My hands tightened around the towel until the weave printed little squares into my skin. Mom tried again. "Frank, this is too much. It's not right." He didn't raise his voice. My father never had to. His certainty did the lifting. "It's practical," he said. "Diane is always taking care of the big things. That's who she is. That's who she is." I heard the past tense. That wasn't a tense. It was a shape, a silhouette cut out of me that everyone recognized sooner than I did. Besides, Greg added, and I could hear him fishing in the fridge, the hollow bump of a bottle against glass shelves. What's she doing with it? She's not even married. No kids. That apartment's a money sink. The apartment. In my mind, I saw the morning light throwing squares on my floor, the way the air smelled after rain, the faint whir of the building's old elevator like a robot clearing its throat. The first night I slept there, I woke at 3 a.m. and walked to the door just to lock it again, to hear the click, like a bell only I could ring. A money sink. The phrase slid slimy over that memory and tried to stick. Greg, Mom said, and for once she sounded like the mother in the pictures, the one with her arms around both of us. She has worked so hard. Don't make me the person who you said we were a family, Greg snapped. The fridge door thumped shut. I'm not asking her to buy me a boat. I'm asking her to keep me out of prison for a mistake that can be fixed if we move fast. There are sentences that knock the wind out of you twice, once with the words, and once with how easily they're said. Prison, mistake, fixed, as if the truth were a scuff you could rub out with your thumb. I shifted my weight. The third step held its breath for me. Dad again, the foreman, assigning jobs at a work site that existed only in his head. Linda, you'll call tomorrow morning about the roof. Get an estimate. Diane respects numbers on paper. I could hear the shrug. If you cry, she'll offer more without us asking, Frank Mom whispered, horrified at him, or at herself, I couldn't tell. Don't. We've done this before, he said. It wasn't cruel. It was bored. It works. I wanted to laugh then, the ugly kind that sounds like choking. Not because it was funny, but because the math of it was suddenly so clean I could see all the way to the bottom. Loving them had become a system with inputs and outputs, and I was the reliable generator humming in the basement. My body did strange things in those minutes. My ears sharpened. I could hear the refrigerator motor, the light rattle of a spoon in a ceramic bowl. My eyes went soft, like my brain had decided pictures were too much and sounds would do. My heart slowed, maybe to conserve heat, maybe to calculate. Greg started listing the precedents out loud like an attorney delivering opening statements to a jury that looked exactly like me. 20, when my business hit that snag. 40 for their anniversary when they were tight. The roof a few years back. Co-signed the thing for the condo fees. She's good. Good. I remembered that night in the steamy diner when he'd told me the business would turn a corner if he could just bridge 2 months. He'd lied about the timeline, but not about how hungry he was to be seen as a man with a corner to turn. I'd written the check with a pen I later lost and tried not to wonder what it meant that he hadn't offered to pay me back. That was on me. Naive isn't a gene. It's a habit. A small plate chimed against the counter. Mom again, words catching like a sweater on a nail. What if she says no, she won't, Dad said, and in that instant I believed him more than I had ever believed anyone in my life. Not because he knew me so well, but because he knew the version of me I had volunteered to be for 12 years. A dependable person does the dependable thing. It's not magic, it's muscle. I thought about stepping inside and detonating the scene. I imagined their flinch, the scramble to soften what couldn't be softened. We didn't mean it like that, sweetheart. We're scared. You know how Greg is. We were going to talk to you. We were just practicing. I saw myself set the lasagna down and say it was still hot if they wanted it. I saw myself being the one to apologize for eavesdropping, for misunderstanding, for making it weird. There is a script to every household. Ours had been workshopped for years. I didn't step in. Instead, I cataloged like at work when a label on the back of a painting didn't match the provenance file, and that mismatch was the clue. I filed away Dad's clinical calm, Mom's pliable grief, Greg's entitlement dressed as urgency. I filed away my own pulse climbing and settling, climbing and settling, as if deciding whether to run or to sleep. Mom's voice softened the way people talked the length of a shadow at dawn. We should at least tell her what it's for. The truth. The truth is, she'll help, Dad said. Everything else is detail. Okay, Mom breathed, but the word didn't sound like agreement. It sounded like surrender. A wine bottle knocked against something. Greg again. We should eat before it gets cold. He meant dinner. I felt the laugh rise again, smaller this time, meaner. My palms had cooled. The towel had gone from helpful to damp. I pictured opening the door and dropping the pan right there at their feet, not as a gesture, but as an accident, a spill to make the floor sticky and hard to ignore. Then I pictured Linda on her knees wiping it up while saying it was fine. It was fine, we'd order in no one panic. I couldn't stand to give them that image to keep. The house shifted chairs, scraped the cadence of plates and silverware, a low conversational hum, as if nothing consequential had happened in that kitchen except deciding on salad dressing. They were moving on. I wasn't. A moth fretted against the porch light. I remember that like it was the only honest thing in the frame. I took one breath, then another. I backed down the steps the way I had come up, left, right, in a pause on the third. The step gave its soft complaint. I winced and waited. No one came. At the car, I set the lasagna on the passenger seat like a sleeping child and buckled it in by reflex. I don't know why. Maybe because I wanted to protect the part of me that still believed effort could be strapped down and saved by following the rules. The phone lit again, a second little sun, in the dark car. This time, I didn't look. I turned the key and felt the vibration rise through the steering wheel into my bones. I pulled out slow so the headlights wouldn't brush too hard against the front windows. At the stop sign, I didn't turn right or left. I went straight. You can do that on a grid if you don't care where you end up. Behind me, the porch lamp burned on. In front of me, green lights rolled down the boulevard, like invitations I hadn't learned to decline yet. The lasagna cooled. The night opened like a road you didn't know your car could take. And the sentence that had cracked the evening, the one about me not being a problem, kept turning over in my mouth, losing its shell, exposing a bright, raw center. I had always been the solution to someone else's mess. I just hadn't noticed the math by the time the first neon sign blinked past, and the radio found a station that wasn't static. I knew this much: I wasn't going to confront them tonight. I was done playing lawyer for their feelings. Tomorrow would require a different kind of work, quiet, methodical, the kind I was very, very good at. I drove. The map rerouted in my head to a place I hadn't named yet. When I finally parked, the engine ticked like a clock winding down. I looked at my hands wrapped around nothing and realized how light they felt. The next morning would be the beginning of the ledger. But before numbers, before passwords, before locks and notices and new accounts, there was this: a woman in a dark apartment, listening to the city breathe, letting the old script fall out of her mouth without swallowing. Outside somewhere, a siren rose and fell. Inside, I stood very still and let the night decide where to put me. Tomorrow, I thought, and the word didn't sound like dread. It sounded like a door. The city didn't look like mine that night. I'd driven these streets for years, but with the lasagna cooling beside me, they felt borrowed, like I was idling in someone else's life. The sodium street lamps smeared the wet pavement in shades of bronze, and every stoplight seemed to pause longer than it had any right to. I kept going anyway, turning at random, taking the long way to nowhere. The smell of roasted garlic clung stubbornly inside the car, sweet and sharp at the same time, like the memory of a kindness you can't decide was real. I cracked the window for air, but the scent just mingled with the cold bite of late summer night, a mix that made my chest ache in a place I didn't have a name for. The radio was off, but my mind wasn't quiet. Every word from that kitchen replayed with surgical precision. She always gives. Her money is family money. It's not lying, it's family. The voices in my head weren't muffled or distorted. They were clear, unshakable, like a recording you can't delete because it's burned into the hardware. At a red light, my hands tightened on the steering wheel until my knuckles went pale. Across the intersection, a family walked out of a diner, 2 kids swinging their arms wildly, the dad holding the door for the mom. It looked easy. Maybe it was, or maybe that too was a script just acted better than the one I'd been cast in. Somewhere between the 3rd and 4th turn, a flashback slammed into me. I was 18, home from my first semester of college. Greg had a business opportunity and needed a new laptop to get it off the ground. My parents couldn't swing it. Dad was between jobs, Mom's hours at the clinic had been cut. We sat in the living room, the air thick with the smell of instant coffee and late-night worry. Greg was pacing then, too, making promises in loops. It's just until I get investors. It's a sure thing. You can use it when I'm not working on the site. I'd been saving for a trip to Italy with my roommate, a dream built from part-time shifts at the bookstore, and birthday money I hadn't touched. Without thinking twice, I told him I'd cover it. I still remember the way my parents' shoulders dropped the collective exhale, like they'd been holding their breath for years. Greg hugged me. My mom called me our rock. Italy never happened. The business tanked within 6 months. The laptop disappeared. Sold, maybe pawned, no explanation. And I told myself it was fine. That's what family did. The light turned green. I didn't move until the driver behind me tapped their horn. I passed the gas station where I'd once stood in line with my father, paying for a gallon of milk he said he'd forgotten to pick up earlier. When the cashier rang it up, he'd turned to me and asked quietly if I had a few bucks to cover the difference. I'd handed him my debit card without thinking. A small thing, but now I wondered how many small things had built this tower. I was standing under bricks and bricks of unasked for, unthanked for, unquestioned giving. I turned onto a wider road, the kind that skims the edge of the city, where chain motels and all-night diners pass in an endless blinking sequence. A neon sign for Family Pancake House buzzed in the distance, the M in family flickering on and off. For a moment it read, Fairly. My chest tightened with something that was almost a laugh. That's when another memory surfaced sharper than the rest. I was 22, fresh out of school, clutching my first signing bonus like it was oxygen. I'd planned to put half toward my student loans and the rest into a savings account. But 2 weeks later, Mom called voice-trembling Dad had maxed out a credit card, covering unexpected expenses. Greg had been between jobs again. The minimum payments alone were sinking them. We don't know what to do, she'd said. It's just so much. By the end of that call, I'd offered the entire bonus. Just until you're back on your feet, I'd told them. They promised to pay it back. They never did, and I never asked. I thought about that girl, barely 22, sitting on the floor of her apartment eating ramen with a plastic fork because she couldn't afford dishes yet, and still telling herself it was worth it to keep her family afloat. The hum of the tires against asphalt grew rhythmic, almost hypnotic. I could have kept driving until the tank ran dry. There was comfort in the motion, in the illusion of going somewhere when really you were circling the same point on the map. I didn't want to go home. Home meant stillness, and stillness meant hearing those voices again in my head. But eventually the city thinned into quiet streets, and I found myself in front of my building without remembering the last 3 turns. In the garage, the lights flickered on overhead. I sat for a moment engine idling, staring at the lasagna beside me. The towel was cold now, limp with condensation. It didn't smell like home anymore. It smelled like something I'd made for people who'd already decided how much more they could take. I turned the key, silencing the engine. The sudden absence of sound was almost violent. When I stepped out, my legs felt heavy, like I was walking through wet sand. I didn't take the lasagna. I left it in the passenger seat, buckled in, like I was abandoning some old part of me I couldn't carry upstairs. The elevator ride was slow, the kind where you can hear each floor pass like a coin dropping through a chute. Inside my apartment, I didn't bother turning on the lights. The glow from the city poured in through the windows fractured by the blinds, painting the walls in thin, broken lines. I stood there, still in my coat, letting the quiet wrap itself around me. My phone buzzed once on the counter. I didn't look. Instead, I went to my desk and pulled out a notebook I hadn't touched in months. I drew a line down the center of the first page. On the left, I wrote, date. On the right, amount. And under it, in smaller letters, reason they gave me. It wasn't a plan yet, just the start of one. Somewhere deep in my chest, something small and stubborn shifted. Tomorrow, I thought again. But this time it sounded less like a door and more like the sound of a lock clicking into place. If you'd asked anyone in my family to describe us, they'd have started with Greg. Greg's the talented one. Greg's going places. Greg just needs the right break. And then, almost as an afterthought, Diane. Oh, she's our rock. We never have to worry about her. It's a strange thing to be praised for the absence of worry you cause. The compliment always sounded warm, but it came wrapped in a quiet warning: don't become someone they have to worry about. When we were kids, my parents' approval was a currency, and Greg had a bigger line of credit. He was the firstborn, the son the story they liked telling. He had trophies on his shelves for seasons he didn't even finish, and when he got in trouble at school, the phone calls home were treated like comic relief. "That's just Greg," my dad would say, chuckling like boys will be boys, was an ironclad law of nature. I didn't have trophies. I had report cards, permission slips signed on time, and a desk that was always neat enough for company. If Greg's chaos was the show, my order was the backstage crew making sure the lights came on. And I learned early, if you kept the show running, you got to stay. My first lasagna came from that same logic. I was 12, and Greg had been caught shoplifting baseball cards. Dad came home with his voice like gravel. Mom shut herself in the bedroom. Dinner was going to be silent, tense, maybe skipped altogether. I'd seen that happen before, and I hated it the way the house held its breath until someone broke first. So I pulled out the recipe my grandmother had shown me the summer before. It was supposed to be a Sunday dish, but I figured maybe it could work a miracle on a Tuesday. I boiled the noodles, layered the sauce, cheese, and meat, just the way she'd taught me, pulling the corners with the back of a spoon so nothing dried out. The smell filled the kitchen before my parents came out. When they did, they sat down without a word. Greg mumbled an apology over his plate. By the end of dinner, Mom was talking again. Dad's jaw had unclenched, and the house exhaled. It felt like I'd pulled a thread and mended the whole fabric. I didn't realize then that I'd just found my role the fixer with an apron. From then on, I cooked for every family crisis. If Greg failed a class, I made cookies. If Dad lost another job, I baked bread. If Mom was overwhelmed at work, I simmered soup. Food was my peace offering, my bribe for calm, my proof that I was useful. As I got older, the crises got bigger, but the pattern stayed. Greg would call from a new city, a new job, a new problem. My parents would panic, and I would step in, sometimes with money, sometimes with time, sometimes just with the ability to absorb their fear and not throw it back at them. I remember once in high school I overheard Mom on the phone with her sister. "Greg's a handful, but Diane's a blessing. She never says no." She said it with pride, like it was the best thing a daughter could be. And maybe it was, if you didn't mind that the blessing was also the backup plan, the safety net, the one they could fall onto without asking if she was ready. Even when I left for college, the pattern followed me. I was careful with my expenses, took on work-study jobs, clipped coupons, and every so often I'd get a call, "The electric bill's higher than we expected." "Greg's car broke down on the way to an interview. Your dad's check is late this month." I told myself it was temporary, that once they got through this stretch, they wouldn't need me so much. That belief kept me generous long after generosity had turned into obligation. The irony is they taught me to be capable, how to manage money, how to problem solve, how to keep calm when things got messy. But they also taught me that my capability belonged to them, that it was selfish to keep any part of it for myself. When you grow up being the reliable one, you don't learn how to say no. You learn how to say how much and how soon. And you measure your worth by how quickly you can fix what someone else has broken. That's why for years, I didn't even notice the imbalance. I thought that's what love was, a willingness to give until it hurts, and then a little more, because they needed it. It wasn't until much later, standing on a porch with a lasagna cooling in my hands, that I realized I'd been cast in a role I never auditioned for, and that if I didn't walk off the stage, the script would never change. By the time I was 24, I'd stopped believing in the right break. I'd seen Greg get more breaks than anyone I knew: job referrals, cash infusions, introductions to people who could open doors, and somehow the doors never stayed open. I didn't want breaks. I wanted foundations. After college, I took the first job that would have me administrative assistant at a small regional auction house. I filed provenance reports, updated spreadsheets, and brewed so much burnt coffee that the smell lived in my hair. It wasn't glamorous, but it put me in the same room as objects that carried stories: a silk kimono from Kyoto, a 19th century seascape that still smelled faintly of salt, a pocket watch with an engraving no one could quite translate. I started staying late, combing through archives when the office was empty. I learned to read the language of auction tags to spot when a minor restoration was actually a patch job worth thousands in lost value. I asked questions too many, according to one senior appraiser, but Marta Ellison, then the head of risk and compliance, saw something in me. Marta was the kind of woman who wore tailored blazers to the warehouse and heels that clicked like punctuation. She'd once been burned in a scandal involving a forged Picasso, and a client who swore on his mother's grave it was authentic. The fallout cost her a job at a prestigious house in London. I learned the hard way, she told me once, over burnt coffee you either verify everything or you end up cleaning up someone else's mess. Under her mentorship, I moved from admin work into the verification team. I learned to spot hairline cracks in porcelain under a UV lamp, to track the chain of ownership for a painting, back 2 centuries to identify the difference between authentic brushwork and a clever imitation. It was in those years that I also met Theo. He lived 1 floor above me in a crumbling apartment building with a temperamental elevator. We met in the laundry room when I accidentally grabbed his dryer load, mistaking it for mine. Unless you're also into vintage rock tees and ripped jeans, I think these are mine, he'd said, grinning. Theo was a cybersecurity engineer by day and a night owl by preference. When he learned what I did for a living, he showed me how easily provenance records could be altered if you didn't have strong digital safeguards. He'd pop by with takeout, and between bites walk me through how to set up secure storage for high-value documents. You protect art from forgers, he'd say. I protect data from them. Then there was Elliot Ward, my unofficial rival. Elliot had a pedigree art history degree from Yale internship at Christie's, family money in the background like a safety net. He was sharp, ambitious, and never missed a chance to point out when I'd missed a detail. At first, we grated against each other. But over time, I realized he wasn't trying to trip me up, he was testing me. And when I passed, he gave me the kind of nod you give an equal. I wasn't rich. I wasn't flashy. But I was building something I could stand on. Each promotion felt like a brick in a wall no one could knock over. When Orion Auction Group recruited me to join their New York headquarters, I said yes without hesitation. Orion was another World Glass Walls-controlled lighting vaults that smelled faintly of cedar and cold metal. The work was precise sometimes, grueling, but deeply satisfying. I specialized in forensic provenance, verifying not just an object's history, but the legality of every transfer, every sale. I saw what greed could do up close: smuggling rings disguised as art collectives, laundered money passed off as generous donations, families torn apart over disputed inheritances. Ironically, the patterns I saw in those cases weren't that different from the patterns in my own family. The same entitlement, the same quiet rewriting of the past to justify taking more. Still, I didn't connect the dots. Not yet. I poured myself into the work, telling myself that my career was separate, untouchable, that what I built here was mine. The year I made senior analyst, Marta took me aside in the hallway. "You've got something rare," she said. "You can see the whole picture without getting sentimental about the brushstrokes." I took it as the highest compliment she could give. I didn't realize then that I would need that exact skill to survive my own family, because while I was busy verifying the truth of objects, I'd let the truth at home slide under the door without inspection. And by the time I held that lasagna on the porch, my personal provenance file was already full of forged entries. In the days after the porch, I moved like a woman holding glass in her chest, careful not to let it shift or cut deeper. I didn't rage. I didn't call anyone. I didn't even finish unpacking my work bag when I got home that night. I just put the lasagna in the fridge, sat on the couch in the dark, and listened to the refrigerator hum. By morning, the numbness had calcified into something else: resolve. My first instinct wasn't to retaliate. It was to secure the perimeter. I called Marta first. She didn't waste time with sympathy. "You've got to get your accounts locked down now," she said, her voice sharp as the click of her pen. "If they've taken before, they'll try again. Do it before they realize you know." She walked me through the checklist. Close all joint accounts, no matter how inactive. Change passwords on every platform, even ones that seemed irrelevant. Transfer liquid assets into a secure holding account they didn't know existed. "You've been documenting your transfers to them, right?" she asked. I hesitated. Sort of. Sort of won't hold in court. Start digging. That night, Theo came over with 2 laptops and a bag of takeout. He set up on my kitchen table wires, snaking between devices. Think of this, like a museum heist. But in reverse, he said. We're not stealing anything, we're sealing it in a vault. He installed multi-factor authentication on every account, scrubbed old recovery emails that linked back to family shared addresses and encrypted folders of my financial history. If they want to make claims about money, they'll have to do it without rewriting your records, he said, tapping the final command, like a period, at the end of a sentence. The third person I looped in was Elliot. It wasn't out of sentiment, it was strategy. He knew the art of the counterattack, not just winning, but winning so thoroughly that no one would try again. We met at a wine bar 2 blocks from Orion, the kind of place where people spoke in hushed voices, and the glasses always looked hand-polished. You're telling me your family is... What, running a quiet extortion racket on you, he said, swirling his glass. Not exactly. More like they've normalized taking whatever they want. And now they want more. He sat back calculating. They'll frame it as helping Greg. Family obligation is their currency. They'll make you the villain for refusing. They already have, I said. Elliot's smile was thin, clinical. Then don't play defense. Build your case before they know there's a case to build. For the next week, my life split in 2. By day, I verified the provenance of objects worth millions, tracing the history of brushstrokes and ownership with surgical precision. By night, I reconstructed the financial history of my family's requests, every emergency, every loan, every unexplained withdrawal from a joint account I'd once been foolish enough to open. Patterns emerged. The amounts weren't random. They escalated. The timing wasn't coincidental. They coincided with Greg's failed ventures, his tax deadlines, his gambling losses, and every single time my compliance had been framed as love. Marta reviewed my spreadsheet. You're not dealing with family issues, she said flatly. You're dealing with financial abuse. Don't confuse the 2. Still, there was a part of me that flinched at every step. These were the people who'd taught me how to ride a bike, who'd been there when I graduated, who'd eaten my lasagna every Sunday for 12 years. Even in betrayal, the muscle memory of loyalty was hard to kill. It was Theo who finally said what I couldn't. They're not going to stop because you ask them to. They'll stop when you become a wall they can't climb. The wall was going up brick by brick, and I was starting to understand something. If I built it high enough, it wouldn't just keep them out. It might finally keep me safe inside. It came on a Tuesday. I was cataloging a collection of 19th century maritime paintings when my phone lit up with an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Moments later, an email arrived from my building's concierge. There's a courier here for you. They say it's urgent. I signed for the envelope without thinking. It was heavier than I expected, the kind of weight that suggested bad news. Inside was a stack of papers clipped and stamped with a court seal. Summons. The language was cold, mechanical. My parents, Frank and Linda, were filing suit against me. The claim that the hundreds of thousands I had given them over the years were loans, not gifts. That I had reneged on a verbal agreement to continue support. That my refusal had caused emotional and financial distress requiring compensation. There was even a number, $300, $1,000 plus damages. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I'd prepared for manipulation, for guilt trips, for Greg showing up at my door at midnight. But this was war in paper form. I called Marta first. She didn't even sound surprised. They've realized you're not bending, she said. So now they're trying to scare you into breaking. Can they do this? I mean, legally, they can file. Anyone can file. Winning is another matter. Within an hour, she had me on a 3-way call with her friend Carol Kim, a litigation attorney with a reputation for dismantling weak cases before they reached trial. Carol spoke with surgical precision. This is harassment wrapped in legalese, she said. They're banking on you folding under the threat, but your records, if complete, will make them look reckless. I don't want a public fight, I said. I just want them out of my life. Carol's pause was deliberate. Then we'll make them regret picking this battlefield. 2 days later, I saw them in person for the first time since the porch. Not by my choice. I was stepping out of the Orion building when Linda appeared on the sidewalk as if she'd been waiting. Her makeup was smudged. Her coat was buttoned wrong. "Diane, please," she said, grabbing my arm. "Can we talk?" "No," I said. "Not here, just 5 minutes. This isn't you. You don't turn your back on family." I looked at her, really looked. "That version of me died on your porch 2 weeks ago." She flinched like I'd struck her, but she didn't let go. "You know your father didn't want to do this. But Greg, he's in trouble. Prison trouble. If you help now, we can make this all go away." I pulled my arm free. The only thing going away is my patience. Pedestrians streamed past us. Some glanced over curious, sensing the electricity of an argument about to turn public. For a second, I saw the calculation in her eyes, whether to create a scene, to make me look cold and unfeeling in front of strangers. She didn't. Not yet. When I got home that night, Theo had already hacked together a private case file repository. "We're treating this like corporate espionage," he said, "because that's what it is, just wearing a family mask." I spent the evening uploading everything: bank statements, emails, even handwritten notes where my parents had thanked me for gifts. Every piece of evidence was another brick in the wall. Still, the summons sat on my desk like an uninvited guest. I couldn't throw it away. I couldn't ignore it. I could only stare at it and feel the truth settle in my bones. They weren't bluffing. They were willing to destroy me to preserve their version of the family. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and lemon cleaner. I arrived early, hoping to avoid crossing paths with them before we were inside, but fate wasn't interested in my comfort. Frank and Linda were already in the hallway outside the courtroom. Frank stood with his arms crossed, jaw set, in the same stubborn angle I'd seen since childhood. Linda was in full theater mode. Subtle tears, a silk scarf, the look of a woman wronged. Greg wasn't there. I wondered if he was hiding or just unwilling to see me like this. Carol found me and pressed a folder into my hands. "Remember," she said, "they want a performance. Don't give it to them. Facts only." Inside, the clerk called our case. We sat at opposite tables. My parents' lawyer, a man with 2 white teeth, painted a picture of a dutiful daughter who had promised to help her family, then abandoned them. He spoke of verbal agreements and betrayal of trust, his voice dripping with rehearsed outrage. When it was my turn, Carol slid a single page across to me. "This is your moment," she whispered. I stood. My hands didn't shake. "You think I'm just a name on paper," I said, looking directly at Frank. Then I let a slow smile curve. I was the paper. Every deposit, every wire, every withdrawal, you signed them, you thanked me in writing, and you spent them without once calling it a loan. Carol began distributing copies of our exhibits, bank statements with handwritten thank you notes from Linda emails, where Greg explicitly called the money a gift, even a holiday card where Frank had written, "Couldn't have made it without you." The judge flipped through the stack, her expression tightening. "Do the plaintiffs have any written agreement of repayment?" she asked. Their lawyer shuffled papers, stalling. "Not in writing, Your Honor, but then this is a gift, not a loan," the judge said flatly. Case dismissed. It was over in less than 20 minutes. Frank's face went the color of weathered brick. Linda stared at the floor. For a heartbeat, I almost felt the urge to reach out to tell them we could still salvage something. But the truth was too loud now, and I'd learned to stop shoving it into a closet. In the hallway, Linda caught my sleeve. "You didn't have to humiliate us." I looked at her eyes level. "You taught me that dignity is earned, not inherited." I walked out into the sunlight with Carol and Theo flanking me like bookends. The air felt sharper, cleaner. But under the relief, there was something else, something heavier. Winning in court didn't mean winning with your heart intact. The call came at 11:47 p.m., the kind of hour when bad news likes to arrive. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew who it was before I picked up. "Diane, it's me." Greg's voice rasped low and hoarse. I don't have much time. They're saying I could get 18 months. I sat up in bed, the city lights from the river flickering across my ceiling. And you're calling me because you're my sister, he burst out. Because you've always helped. I know you hate me right now, but I swear this time I'll pay you back. It would have been easier if he'd yelled or blamed me or tried to guilt-trip me. But instead, his voice broke on the next words. I'm scared, Di. I closed my eyes and saw him, not the man in trouble now, but the boy in the faded hoodie from our teenage years, the one who used to sneak into my room with Oreos when I couldn't sleep. That boy was long gone. Greg, I said slowly, I don't have anything left to give you. Not money, not time, not trust. You took the last of that on the night I stood outside the porch. Please, he whispered. This is prison we're talking about. You chose this path, and you'll have to walk it yourself. Silence stretched between us, heavy and final. I could hear his breathing hitch, the sound of a man realizing the safety net was gone. Then click. I put the phone face down on the nightstand. My hands didn't shake. My pulse didn't race. I just felt empty, but in the way a room feels after you've cleared out the clutter. When I finally drifted off, it wasn't to the sound of guilt. It was to the soft hum of the city outside, carrying me into a quieter place. The apartment felt different once I decided to leave. Not bigger, not smaller, just lighter, as though the walls themselves knew they wouldn't have to hold my history anymore. I started with the top shelf of the hall closet, the place I'd shoved the things I couldn't bring myself to throw away. Old family photos, birthday cards with neat cursive from Linda, always signed Love Mom, as if the title alone could undo the damage. The ceramic mug Greg had painted for me in second grade, the glaze chipping at the rim. I didn't cry. I just made 2 piles, take and leave. The lasagna tray sat on the counter, stainless steel dulled from years of use. I'd brought it home after that last Sunday, thinking I might still use it. Now it looked like an artifact from another life. I remembered the feel of its warm handles as I'd set it on their table, the way Frank would heap his plate, without ever looking up, the way Linda would murmur perfect as always before asking for something else. I set it in the leave pile. Theo came by to help carry boxes, his easy humor filling the silence. You sure about this? He asked, glancing at the tray. I'm sure, I said. Some things aren't worth taking across an ocean. The final sweep of the apartment felt like walking through a museum of someone else's life. The sofa where I'd fallen asleep after too many late nights at work. The desk where I'd reviewed Greg's business plans before wiring him money. I closed each door behind me as I moved from room to room until there was only the front door left. Outside, the moving truck waited. London was waiting. I turned the key in the lock, felt the click, and let my hand rest on the door for a long moment. Not to say goodbye, just to mark the fact that I was leaving by choice. As I stepped into the hallway, I felt lighter than I had in years. The airport was busy in that way only early morning flights can be half asleep, travelers clutching coffee, the soft metallic echo of rolling suitcases, the low murmur of boarding calls. I'd packed light, 2 checked bags, 1 carry-on. The rest of my life fit into a rented storage unit, or it didn't come at all. Theo hugged me at the curb, his arms solid and certain. Don't let them drag you back into their gravity, he said. I won't, I promised, though we both knew it was less a promise than a survival rule. At security, I placed my phone in the tray. When I picked it up again, there was a new message. Mom. The preview line froze me. I'm sorry. I stood just beyond the metal detectors, people flowing around me like water around a stone. My thumb hovered before opening it. I hope one day you can forgive me. We were wrong about everything. It should have cracked something open in me. But instead I felt a quiet ache, the kind that doesn't demand to be healed right away. I typed back slowly. I hope one day you earn it. And then I hit send. At my gate, I sat by the window. Outside, the sky over the runway was streaked pink and gold. the plane to London waited like a clean slate engine's humming low patient. I didn't replay old arguments or wonder how they were taking my reply. I just watched the sun rise, knowing that for the first time in years the day ahead belonged entirely to me. When boarding was called, I adjusted the strap of my bag and walked forward. London has a way of making you feel both anonymous and infinite. 6 months in, I'd found a rhythm that was mine alone. Morning walks along the Thames, late nights in the office, with the hum of the city. Beyond the glass weekends, wandering bookshops in Bloomsbury. Greg had been sentenced to 18 months. Frank and Linda had sold the house and moved to Florida, living ironically enough off the charity of my mother's older sister, who had once told me I should never give more than you can afford to lose. I didn't check in on them. I didn't need to. One rainy Sunday, I found myself in the kitchen of my flat, sleeves rolled up, pulling out flour, eggs, and ricotta. My hands moved without thought, the old motions coming back like muscle memory. The smell of garlic and basil filled the air, steam clouding the small window over the sink. When it was done, I set the lasagna in the center of my table. No empty chairs waiting for others. No expectation of gratitude. I took the first bite, slowly tasting not the memories, but the present rich warm and entirely my own. I realized then that I hadn't brought lasagna to this table to remember them. I'd brought it to remember me, the woman who could give without hollowing herself out, the one who finally understood that love without respect is just debt dressed in sentiment. The rain kept falling outside, soft against the glass, and for the first time in years I felt full. Walking away isn't weakness. It's choosing yourself. If this hit home for you, click. Like let it tell YouTube you want more. Share it with someone who needs the reminder. And subscribe, because the next story might be the one that gives you the courage to finally close that door.